There is a wooden door in the side of a hill on a farm outside of Kishacoquiles Valley, Pennsylvania, and if you did not know to look for it, you would walk past it without a second thought. It sits flush with the slope, the hinges darkened with age, the wood around the frame packed with straw on the inside. On a January morning when the fields are frozen and the sky has that low pewter color that means nothing is going to grow for another 3 months, you can open that door and step inside and find carrots so fresh they still smell like rain. No electricity runs to that cellar. No compressor hums beneath the floor. The temperature inside holds between 32 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit, not because anyone adjusted a dial, but because the earth itself holds it there. The same earth that has been maintaining that temperature in that specific location since before anyone living can remember. The family who maintains this cellar is the Yoder family, settled in Mifflin County for 4 generations. The current head of the household, a man named Ezra, was shown the cellar by his father, who dug the current entry passage himself in 1948 after the original hillside access collapsed during a wet spring. The technique Ezra uses to stock that cellar every autumn is not meaningfully different from the technique used in the 18th century. When the first German-speaking settlers arrived in the Kishacoquiles Valley and needed to feed their families through winters that were not forgiving, the knowledge did not require a library, it required continuity. One generation handing the next not just the information, but the practice. Not the theory of the thing, the doing of it, repeated until the doing became instinct. Most of us interact with vegetables in a system that has completely severed that continuity. The carrot you pull from a refrigerator drawer was probably harvested months ago, treated with 1-methylcyclopropene to suppress the natural ripening signal, sealed in modified atmosphere packaging, and transported through a cold chain designed to keep it looking like a carrot, without actually doing the things that a well-stored carrot does for its own cellular structure over winter. It arrives at your house looking fine, but something happened to it on the way. A long, managed decline made invisible by the fact that the alternative has mostly disappeared from common knowledge. Most people have never tasted a carrot stored in cold, damp soil for 60 days. It is a different experience entirely, and the reason for that difference takes you somewhere genuinely surprising if you follow it far enough. Root crops do not merely tolerate cold storage, they improve in it. When a carrot or parsnip or beet is held just above freezing, in conditions of high humidity, with good air circulation in darkness, it begins converting starches into sugars. This is the plant's biological response to the threat of frost. It is trying to survive. It is lowering the freezing point of its own cellular fluid by sweetening itself, pulling every available starch molecule into solution so that its cells do not crystallize and rupture when the temperature drops further. After 2 months in proper storage, a parsnip that tasted like raw starch in October tastes almost honeyed in December. The Amish have known this for 300 years. Food scientists formally documented and published the biochemical mechanism behind it in the late 20th century. The knowledge and the science arrived at the same answer from opposite directions, and neither camp had much to teach the other about the outcome. This is the thing about a root cellar that most conversations about them miss entirely. It is not simply a cool, dark room where vegetables go to decay more slowly than they would otherwise. It is an active system. The vegetables inside it are still alive. They are still metabolizing, still responding to their environment, still doing what living things do when the conditions are right. The cellar is managed, it breathes, and the family that tends it is not merely storing food. They are maintaining the conditions under which a living system continues to function. That distinction matters more than it sounds. Ezra walks through it with me in November, a few weeks after the main harvest has come in. The first thing you notice stepping inside is that it does not smell like rot. It smells like soil and something faintly mineral, the way a deep garden bed smells after a soaking rain, the way a well that has been dug recently smells in the first weeks before the stone walls lose their freshness. The walls are packed earth on 3 sides. The 4th wall, facing the interior of the hillside, is laid fieldstone, each piece chosen for its flatness and set without mortar by Ezra's grandfather in a pattern that allows cold air to seep through the gaps without allowing water to follow. The floor is gravel over bare earth, and through the gravel, when you crouch down and hold still, you can feel a faint coolness rising from below. The earth beneath is doing what the earth has always done in that location. You are standing inside something that is not powered by anything except geology and patience and 3 generations of accumulated judgment about what works. Along the walls, the vegetables are not simply piled. Ruth, Ezra's wife, has packed them in wide wooden bins layered with damp sand. Each bin built from rough-sawn oak that has been used for this purpose for so many seasons that the wood has darkened to the color of old leather. The sand matters more than most people expect when they first hear about it. It maintains the humidity around each vegetable individually, not soaking wet, not dry, but damp enough that the vegetable does not lose moisture through its skin over the course of a long storage. A carrot that desiccates in dry air becomes fibrous and mealy, its sugars concentrated in all the wrong ways, its texture gone soft and yielding in a manner that has nothing to do with ripeness. A carrot surrounded by damp sand retains its crispness and its cellular integrity for months longer than any refrigerator drawer will manage, because the refrigerator drawer is designed around a different problem, keeping leafy greens from wilting. And the solution to that problem actively works against the long storage of roots. This is where something becomes clear that the convenience of the modern cold chain has made almost impossible to notice. The refrigerator is a single environment solution imposed on a problem that requires multiple distinct environments. Lettuce needs low temperature and moderate humidity and some air movement. Carrots need low temperature and high humidity and minimal air movement and darkness. Apples need low temperature and high humidity and isolation from everything else because of what they emit. Potatoes need low temperature and high humidity and absolute darkness because light triggers a process that produces a compound toxic in sufficient quantities. The Amish root cellar, at its most developed, addresses all of these separately. Different bins, different locations within the cellar, different materials used for packing, because the people who designed it learned by watching what happened when they got the conditions wrong. The refrigerator never had to learn those lessons. It simply made them invisible. Lancaster County, formally established in 1729, was already producing significant vegetable surpluses within a generation of its settlement, not because the soil there is uniquely extraordinary, though it is excellent soil, but because the German and Swiss settlers who came to that region brought with them centuries of European experience managing food through winters far more severe than most of them had expected to find in Pennsylvania. They brought the knowledge the way you bring a tool you know you will need before you know exactly what shape the problem will take. Root cellaring in the Germanic tradition dates to at least the early medieval period, with documented evidence of purpose-built storage chambers beneath farmhouses in the Rhine Valley going back to the 12th century. The settlers who founded Lancaster County were not improvising. They were adapting a refined tradition to a new geography, and the adaptation happened quickly because the underlying principles were already solid. Lancaster County today has more Amish-operated farms than any other county in the United States. The root cellar is still standard on those farms. Not as a tradition maintained for its own sake, not as a gesture toward the past, but because it works, every season without fail, at a cost of almost nothing once the structure is in place. And the Amish have never had a compelling reason to replace something that works with something that merely functions. But the cellar is only one part of the system, and here is where the practical intelligence of the whole thing becomes genuinely difficult to dismiss. The location of the cellar matters as much as its construction, and the Amish understanding of site selection has a sophistication that is easy to overlook because it is expressed in practice rather than in documentation. A cellar dug into a south-facing slope will run warmer than one dug into a north-facing slope, because the southern exposure receives direct winter sun and the ground temperature above it fluctuates accordingly. The north-facing hillside stays shaded through the short days of January and February, and the ground temperature above it remains more stable. Colder overall, but reliably cold rather than cold, with occasional warm interruptions that can trigger premature sprouting in stored potatoes or early softening in beets. Ezra's cellar faces north. His grandfather chose that hillside deliberately, on the advice of his own father, who had watched what happened to the produce stored in a south-facing chamber his neighbor had built 2 farms over. The carrots had sprouted in February. The lesson cost the neighbor a portion of his winter stores. It cost Ezra's family nothing because the knowledge traveled before the mistake could be repeated. The ventilation system tells the same kind of story. Near the top of the cellar, on the uphill side where the earth pressure is greatest, there is a small wooden vent with a sliding cover made from a single flat piece of oak, worn smooth on its edges from 30 years of Ezra's hand moving it open and closed. He opens the vent at night to draw cold air down through the cellar and closes it during the day to prevent the midday warmth from undoing what the night accomplished. By January, when the temperature outside has settled into consistent cold, he barely touches it. The cellar has reached its winter equilibrium, and the Earth is doing the regulation it was always going to do once the ambient temperature stopped fighting it. Too much ventilation in deep winter pulls moisture out of the air inside the cellar and begins the slow desiccation of everything stored within it. The cellar has reached its winter equilibrium and the Earth is doing the regulation it was always going to do once the ambient temperature stopped fighting it. Too much ventilation in deep winter pulls moisture out of the air inside the cellar and begins the slow desiccation of everything stored within it. Too little ventilation in early autumn, when the harvest is still warm from the field and the biological activity of living vegetables is still producing heat and moisture, allows mold to establish itself in the corners and work its way through a bin of beets faster than most people would believe possible. Ezra knows when to open and when to close, not because he measures anything, but because he has been in that cellar every week from October through March for 30 years, and the cellar has taught him what it needs the way a long-tended garden teaches a gardener to read soil before a trowel touches it. The knowledge lives in repetition. It cannot be downloaded. It has to be earned by showing up. Now, and this is the part that stops most people who have never thought carefully about any of this. You do not need a hillside to apply these principles. You do not need a farm or a significant amount of space or any previous experience with food storage beyond what you learned the first time you left something too long in a crisper drawer. The hillside is ideal. It is not required. Even in a basement without any meaningful slope, even in a crawl space with a concrete floor, even in a large buried container insulated with straw bales against an exterior, north-facing wall, the same principles that govern Ezra's cellar can be put to work. What you are trying to create is a space where the temperature stays consistently cold without crossing into freezing. The 32 to 40 degree range is the target, where the humidity remains high without becoming wet, where darkness is complete because light triggers biological responses in stored vegetables that storage is specifically trying to suppress, and where some air movement prevents the accumulation of ethylene gas, the naturally occurring compound that vegetables produce as they ripen, and that, when it builds up in an enclosed space, accelerates the ripening of everything around it. A wooden bin in the coldest corner of an unheated basement or garage, packed with damp sand, fitted with a small gap at the top for air circulation, with vegetables layered in rather than piled together, so that air moves between them and one compromised vegetable cannot silently infect its neighbors. This is a root cellar in every meaningful sense. The principles are identical whether the structure is a hillside excavation in Mifflin County that has been in continuous use since 1948, or a repurposed wooden crate against an uninsulated exterior wall in a house on a quarter-acre lot somewhere in the Midwest. The scale changes, the logic does not. What the Amish understood that the broader culture quietly forgot when the supermarket made forgetting easy is that food storage is not passive. Putting vegetables in a cold place is not the same as storing them correctly, and the difference between those two things is the difference between a root vegetable that improves over 2 months and one that merely declines more slowly than it would at room temperature. The selection matters enormously. Vegetables with any surface damage, any soft spots, any signs of pest activity should never go into long storage, because damaged cells produce ethylene at an accelerated rate, and a single compromised carrot left unchecked will move through a bin the way a rumor moves through a small community. Quietly at first, then all at once. The preparation matters in ways that seem counterintuitive until you understand the biology. Greens should be trimmed from root vegetables before storage. Not because greens are undesirable, but because they continue to pull moisture from the root through the cut stem even after harvest, slowly desiccating what you are trying to preserve. Beet greens left attached will draw the sweetness out of a beet in storage the way a straw draws liquid from a glass. You trim them and you leave an inch of stem, just enough to seal the wound without leaving enough for the green to continue its work. This is knowledge that arrives not from a textbook, but from the specific disappointment of opening a bin in December and finding something that should have been excellent already past its best. The arrangement matters in ways that the modern refrigerator has made almost entirely invisible. Certain vegetables should not share a storage space at all, because the compounds one produces will alter the development of another in ways that benefit neither. Apples, which produce ethylene in quantities high enough to affect everything around them, should be stored in isolation from root vegetables, and specifically from carrots, which are acutely sensitive to ethylene exposure and will develop a bitter, unpleasant flavor within weeks of sharing space with even a modest quantity of apples. An Amish woman who has managed a root cellar for 20 seasons can tell you this from direct consequence. A food preservation researcher at Cornell University's College of Agriculture and Life Sciences can tell you this from documented experimental data. They are describing the same observed truth. One of them learned it from a laboratory. The other learned it from a winter she would prefer not to repeat. There is something in that convergence that deserves more than a passing mention, because it speaks to something important about how practical knowledge actually works in the world. The Amish did not study ethylene biochemistry. They stored apples near carrots once, and the carrots came out bitter, and they did not do it again. They stored beets without trimming the greens once, and found the texture compromised by February, and they trimmed the greens from then on. Every rule in a well-run root cellar was earned by the generation that broke it, and the gift of a functioning oral tradition is that the next generation inherits the result of the mistake without having to live through the mistake itself. The industrial food system eliminated most of the consequences that originally generated those lessons, and in eliminating the consequences, it slowly dissolved the knowledge. The root cellar did not disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because the supply chain made it unnecessary to learn what it required. The cost of that disappearance has been almost entirely invisible. Most people do not know what they have lost because they have never tasted what they are missing. If you are thinking about any version of this, a dedicated cellar, a cold room in a basement corner, a single wooden bin packed with sand for 50 pounds of carrots, there is one thing worth doing before the first hard frost arrives this coming autumn. Walk through whatever storage space you have access to and identify the coldest, darkest corner, not the coolest, the coldest, the place where the temperature drops furthest when the season turns. That corner is your starting point. Build or find a wooden bin that fits it. Source clean sand, the kind sold for children's sandboxes, which is washed free of the organic material that introduces mold into storage. Dampen it until a handful holds its shape when squeezed and then crumbles slowly when you release the pressure. That is the right moisture level, and it is a physical sensation you will remember after the first time you get it right. Harvest or buy root vegetables with their greens still attached, which tells you they have not been in long commercial storage already. Trim the greens, leave an inch of stem, layer the vegetables into the sand without letting them touch each other, each one nestled in its own small pocket of cool, damp mineral darkness, each one insulated from the metabolic activity of its neighbor. Close the bin. Check it every 2 weeks. When you open it, use your nose before your eyes. A well-maintained bin smells clean and mineral, faintly of soil, faintly of cold. If it smells sweet in a yielding, overripe way, something is beginning to break down and needs to be found and removed before it spreads. What you are tasting is a plant that has spent 2 months doing what living things do when the conditions are right, converting, adapting, becoming more than it was when it went in. That process required no electricity, no modified atmosphere packaging, no cold chain spanning half a continent. It required a bin, some sand, a cold corner, and the willingness to pay attention every 2 weeks. The Amish did not invent root cellaring. They inherited it from the centuries of people who learned it from what went wrong when they got it wrong, and they made a quiet, deliberate, entirely unspectacular decision not to forget it when forgetting became an option. That decision gets made again every autumn in Mifflin County and Holmes County and Elkhart County and in every farming community where the knowledge was never allowed to lapse. Not out of stubbornness, not out of suspicion of what replaced it, but because the thing that replaced it has never quite done the same job, and the people who know the difference have never seen a reason to pretend otherwise. The wooden door in the hillside in Kishacoquiles Valley will be opened again in February. Ezra will pull out whatever remains, the parsnips, some potatoes, the last of the beets in their sand, and the field above that cellar will still be frozen solid, and there will be no market open within a reasonable distance, and no delivery expected. There will be the door, and the earth, and the meal that was put away in October when there was enough, so that February could be fed without asking permission from anyone. That door has been opening every February for a very long time. It has never needed a power source. It has never required a subscription. It has never depended on a supply chain that stretches farther than the eye can follow. It has only ever needed someone willing to learn what the earth already knows how to do and to show the next person how to open the door. If you have kept a root cellar or tried to build something like one, even a small improvised version, what did you store and what did you have to figure out the hard way? Leave it in the comments. Someone who is just starting will find it, and it will matter more than you expect.